Welcome back, everyone, to Ghost Chronicles today. I've got something truly eerie for you. 8 real, unsettling stories from people who ventured through the lonely, twisting back roads of the Appalachian Mountains. Imagine this. One man follows a little girl into the woods to help her injured brother, only to find the boy hanging upside down, already dead. Another wakes up in the middle of the night to greasy handprints smeared across their car windows, proof they weren't alone. So sit back, hit that like button, subscribe if you dare, and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let's dive in. Story 1. I was 22 when my cousin Jonah rolled into my driveway driving this old, mustard yellow camper van that looked like it had already lived through 3 cross-country trips and maybe a small fire. He said he bought it off Craigslist from some guy named Chuck who swore the thing had character. The roof sagged. The side mirror was held on with duct tape, and to start the air conditioning, you had to smack the dashboard exactly twice. Not once. Not 3 times, twice. Jonah called it his adventure tank, like that made it all okay. I didn't even want to go on the trip. I had a job interview the next week and barely enough money for gas. But Jonah had been planning this for years, and his friends Miles and Haley were already packed and ready. They were all buzzing with excitement, and I didn't want to be the one to kill the mood. I told myself it'd be a quick escape. One of those impulsive things you do in your 20s just to say you did. We left from outside Akron and headed south. No clear plan, just vague ideas about driving through the Appalachians, cutting across the Smoky Mountains, and maybe ending up somewhere west like Colorado. The van didn't even have a working GPS, so Jonah's phone, taped to the dashboard with painter's tape, became our navigator. The first few days were fine. Back roads, sketchy gas stations, nights sleeping in the van at rest stops. We stopped at this small diner that served coffee in chipped mugs and had a framed photo of a possum in a tuxedo over the register. It was weirdly comforting. Then we crossed into West Virginia. That's when Jonah brought up Dogwood Pass. He'd read about it in some half-baked internet forum. Someone had posted a screenshot of a comment from years ago. No article, no proof, just a blurry picture of a rusted gate next to an overgrown trail. The comment claimed it was an abandoned mining town called Dogwood Pass. No details, just that name, some coordinates, and a bunch of broken links. Naturally, Jonah wanted to find it. It's probably just some collapsed shack, he said, shrugging. By then, he was clearly bored with scenic overlooks and thrift store stops, so we went along. We left the main road in the late afternoon, following a series of smaller roads that got worse with each turn. Pavement, then cracked asphalt, then rough gravel that barely counted as a road. The GPS cut out 20 minutes before we finally saw it. A wooden sign nailed between 2 posts, Dogwood Pass, painted in faded white letters, and beneath it, carved roughly into the wood, one single word, run. We all saw it. No one said anything. Haley's face went pale. Jonah just drove past like it meant nothing. The road beyond was barely a trail, choked by trees littered with rocks and broken glass, like someone had dumped the remnants of an old junkyard there. The trees were too close together, too tight, like they'd been forced to grow that way. Eventually, we rolled into a clearing. There was an old fire pit, a few broken folding chairs, and the rusted remains of a tent pole. Everything looked abandoned in a hurry. Jonah turned off the van. Perfect spot to crash, he said. Haley's voice was cold. We're not staying here. Jonah just laughed it off. Relax, we'll make a fire, take some creepy pictures for Instagram, leave in the morning. She didn't reply. I glanced at Miles, but he just shrugged. It felt wrong, quiet, heavy. I didn't say anything. We built a small fire from scrap wood Jonah had tossed in with the spare tire, passed around a cheap bottle of whiskey, cooked whatever was left in the cooler. Jonah started telling ghost stories, but Haley just kept watching the tree line like she expected something to step out of it. Around midnight, I got up to grab more firewood behind the van. That's when I heard it, steady footsteps, crunching leaves. 4 steps, then silence. My whole body locked up. Miles turned on his phone flashlight, sweeping it toward the noise. Probably a raccoon, Jonah said, but his voice sounded different. Then, again, crunch, crunch. Haley stood up, backing toward the van. Miles followed her. Jonah grabbed a rock and threw it into the woods. It hit something with a metallic clang. Then Haley gasped and pointed. Between two trees stood something. Someone. Tall, impossibly tall, with smooth, pale skin and a blank, featureless face. No eyes, no mouth, just an empty oval. It tilted its head, copying Jonah's movement exactly. Then, the van headlights flicked on. Behind it, dozens more, identical. Perfectly still, lined up in rows like mannequins in a store window. Jonah screamed, dove for the keys. We scrambled inside, doors slamming. He threw the van into reverse, tires spitting dirt. The trees whipped past as we tore back down the trail. For one awful second, I thought I saw one of them in the rearview mirror. But I didn't look again. We drove in dead silence until we finally hit pavement. No one said a word. The gas light had been on for miles when we spotted a flickering yellow light. A gas station, ancient and half-lit. Jonah pulled in. I stepped out to pump gas. The air was wrong. Heavy, like someone was standing right behind me. Then a faint tapping sound from inside the station. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up. The windows were filthy. The shelves inside overturned, coated in dust. No one there. Then the pump light went out. Total darkness, something moved in the reflection behind me. I spun around, nothing. Jonah yelled my name and I bolted for the van. We peeled out, tires screeching. By dawn, we reached a visitor center near the Virginia border. People were walking dogs, taking photos like nothing had happened. We checked into a motel. None of us said a word. Story 2, it was late September. That weird in-between time when life had fallen apart for all three of us. Dan's relationship had ended in chaos. Police, broken glass, the whole thing. Alex got laid off from his job with zero warning, and I'd faked a medical excuse just to take a break from work. None of us had a plan. We threw clothes into backpacks, grabbed snacks from a gas station, and just drove south out of Columbus. Officially, we told people we were going to see the fall leaves. Unofficially, we were trying to escape our lives. By the time we hit Tennessee, we'd stayed in 2 shady motels, one with a water stain shaped like a screaming face, and stopped at a roadside Bigfoot museum that charged $5 to see plaster footprints. Dan loved it. Alex pretended not to, but he took more photos than any of us. It felt good to be nowhere. That afternoon, we were driving down a long ridge into a quiet valley. Trees so thick it felt like we were inside something's lungs. The GPS froze right as we passed a crooked wooden sign. Anti-cakes, cold drinks, and baked goods. An arrow pointed left, down a gravel path that barely existed. Dan didn't even ask, he just turned. "Old lady with moon pies guaranteed," he said. The road twisted under a canopy of branches that scraped and snapped against the car. Alex ducked when one slapped the windshield, even though it didn't crack. The trees grew so close it felt like they were leaning in, waiting. After a while, the woods opened up into a clearing. In the center stood a faded red clapboard house with a sagging porch, covered in junk. Wooden crates, bottles, rusted tools, old books. It didn't look empty. Just forgotten, no lights. Sound, no smoke. "Nothing moving," I said. "Pretty sure they're not open." Dan was already out of the car. "We're just browsing," he said with a grin. Alex followed. I sat there another moment staring at the porch. Something about that place felt off. Would you like me to continue rewriting the rest of the story? Story 2, onwards through all 8. The rocking chair on the porch was moving, slow, steady, but there was nobody sitting in it. No breeze either. I even rolled down my window to check, but the air was perfectly still. Still, I got out. I didn't want to be the coward who stayed behind in the car. As soon as we stepped onto the porch, the details started to stand out. The wrong kind of details. The shelves weren't decorated with knickknacks like you'd expect from some old country store. No. Inside the jars were things that made my stomach twist. One jar had a coiled-up snake floating in yellow liquid. Another held a small bird, but it had a third leg sticking out of its chest. And then there was a mason jar filled with buttons and teeth. The teeth were human. Some even had fillings. I took a step back, trying to breathe past the nausea. Dan knocked anyway. The screen door creaked open by itself. It hadn't even been latched. "Hello?" he called out. "Saw the sign. You open?" Silence. Then slowly the inner door nudged open just an inch or two, like someone had pushed it and walked away. I started to say, Let's not. But Dan was already stepping through. Alex hesitated for half a second, gave me a look that said, "Don't make me go alone," and followed him. I didn't want to be the last one outside. So I went in. The smell hit me first, vinegar and something rotten like spoiled meat. The air inside felt thick, not from heat or dust, just heavy, oppressive. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with murky jars, some filled with dark liquid, others stuffed with things that looked too shriveled and curled to name. Above a curtained doorway hung a dead cuckoo clock. On a nearby table, 3 eyeless dolls with stitched-on grins sat staring at nothing. Above them, a neat row of 5 rifles hung on the wall beneath a cross-stitch sign that read, "Blessed are they who suffer." Dan walked right up to the far wall like he belonged there. "Hugo, look at this," he said, pointing at a black and white photo tacked to the boards. I leaned closer. The picture showed 6 men in old hunting gear standing around what looked like a large mound. At first I thought it was a deer, but then the shapes made sense. An arm, fingers, tangled hair. A bare foot twisted the wrong way. "It wasn't a deer," Alex whispered. "That's not a deer pile." Then the floor above us creaked like one step, slow, heavy. Dan turned toward the staircase in the corner, half-curved and lost in shadow. "Probably a raccoon," he muttered. "Raccoons don't weigh 200 pounds, I said. A dragging sound followed, long and rough, like something big being pulled across the floorboards. My chest went cold. I started backing up. "Let's go," I said, my voice cracking. Dan tilted his head, listening. What if someone's hurt? Maybe they're old, can't move. Then came another step, closer to the top of the stairs. Alex was already edging toward the door. "They can call 911. I'm not doing this." We were nearly on the porch when something upstairs hit the floor with a heavy, echoing thud. Not a step, a fall, Dan bolted. "Start the car," he yelled. I was right behind him. He jammed the key in the ignition. I turned it, nothing, again, dead. The third time, the engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared. Dan floored it, gravel spraying behind us. None of us looked back. We drove for half an hour through endless curves and trees. No one said a word until Dan finally spoke. There was someone up there. Alex's voice was tight. "We saw the photo." "That was bad enough." "No," Dan said. "In the window." When we pulled out, I saw a face. I didn't look. Couldn't. Eventually, we stumbled onto a small bait shop near a park entrance. Inside smelled like dirt and minnows. The man behind the counter looked carved from stone. Scar on his lip, old scabs on his knuckles. Dan told him everything. The jars, the photo, the sound upstairs. The man just stared for a moment before saying, "That place up past mile marker 18. Porch full of glass?" Dan nodded. "You went inside?" "Yeah." The man didn't reply. He bent down, grabbed a small paper bag, and slid it across the counter. Inside was beef jerky. Dan frowned. "We didn't buy anything." The man's eyes didn't move. "Take it and go." That night, none of us slept. We lay in silence, the image of that photo burned into our minds. Not just the bodies, but the way those hunters looked. They weren't solemn. They were proud. Proud of what they'd caught. We left before sunrise. Didn't check out, didn't talk until we were miles past Asheville. At a gas station outside town, Dan popped the trunk. That's when we saw them, greasy handprints. 4 of them. Faint but clear under the light. 1 on the trunk, 2 on the rear windows, 1 by the gas cap. They hadn't been there yesterday. Dan wiped them off without a word. None of us mentioned it again. I was 32 that summer when I decided to take the long road to Braxton. My cousin Jesse was getting married in the mountains. And after losing my factory job, I needed to get out of my head. 6 years on the line and the place shut down overnight. They handed out checks like they were doing us a favor. I remember standing in my kitchen the next morning, fridge door open, staring at nothing. It wasn't hunger I felt, it was emptiness. Like the world had just folded in on itself. So when my mom called to remind me about Jesse's wedding, I said I'd be there. What I didn't tell her was that I wouldn't be taking the interstate. I needed quiet. Needed to drive through something that made sense again. I packed a duffel, filled my thermos with cheap coffee, and pulled out my dad's old road atlas. So GPS. I didn't want a voice telling me where to go. By noon, I was deep in the Blue Ridge. The landscape changed slowly, the hills sharper. The trees pressing closer together, like the earth itself had bones. These woods didn't feel peaceful. They felt alive, watchful. I stopped at a run-down gas station in a place called Mill Creek. The roof sagged, a Coke machine flickered by the door, and a faded mural of a train, painted by someone who clearly had never seen one, stretched across the side wall. The man behind the counter looked me over like he'd seen my kind before. "You heading south?" he asked. "Yeah, Braxton," he nodded once. "Don't drive past sundown." He said it so plainly, like warning me not to leave food out for raccoons. I laughed. He didn't. 30 minutes later, I reached an unmarked fork. The road to the right looked abandoned, half swallowed by moss and years of neglect. So, of course, I took it. The road narrowed. The radio died. My phone lost signal. Gravel turned to dirt. That's when I saw her, standing in the middle of the road. A young woman. Still, one arm raised like she'd been waiting for me. I rolled down the window. "You okay?" She nodded. "My brother's stuck. We need help getting him down." Her voice was calm. Too calm. Down from what? She didn't answer, just turned and walked into the woods. Every instinct in me screamed not to follow. But she looked desperate. Human. So I parked, locked the truck, and went after her. The forest swallowed us almost instantly. She moved fast, smooth, like she'd grown up there. I stumbled to keep up, branches scratching my arms, air getting thicker, wetter, like the forest was breathing around us. Then we reached a small ravine. That's where I saw the boy, hanging upside down from a tree, one leg tangled in vines, his arms limp, his head tilted wrong, too far wrong. I stepped closer before I realized his eyes were open, wide, glassy. He wasn't breathing. "He's dead," I said. But when I turned, she was gone. No sound. No footsteps. Just gone. Panic took over. I spun in circles, calling out, but all I heard was my own voice echoing back. Finally, I pushed through the brush until I stumbled onto the road again. Only now, my truck was gone. In its place was a building. One story, wooden, warped by time. No windows. Just a door that had been pried open and nailed shut again and again. Above it, a sign. The letters had been carved away, just scratches left behind. It looked like a church built out of nightmares. I didn't want to go near it, but I had no phone, no ride, no idea where I was, and the woods felt worse than the dark inside. So I went in. The smell hit first, damp earth and rusted metal. The floor was bare soil, and in the center sat a stone slab, stained dark in ways I didn't want to understand. Candles burned in all four corners. Fresh wax still warm, the flames newly lit. Then I felt breath on the back of my neck. I spun around. A man stood in the doorway, bare feet, denim overalls, a long beard, and eyes so pale and cloudy it was like he'd been born without pupils. "I'm lost," I told him, stepping backward. "I don't want trouble." He stepped forward. I stepped back. Two more shapes slipped into view from I don't know where, the woman and the boy. Only now the boy was standing, taller, his head still tilted at that wrong hanging angle like it didn't belong to him. They didn't speak. They barely moved. They just watched me, patient, like this was exactly where they'd wanted me to end up. I ran, shoved past the man, ducked under the boy's reaching hand, and bolted through the door. I didn't care where I was going, only that it was away. Branches ripped at my clothes and scratched my arms. I could feel the sting of blood. I tripped over a root, smashed my knee against a rock, but I didn't stop. After what felt like hours, I burst out of the trees and stumbled onto gravel, an actual road, right as my chest was about to cave in. Headlights washed over me. I windmilled both arms like I was flagging down a plane. An old pickup braked hard, rust all up the sides, and a woman who looked like somebody's grandma sat behind the wheel with a shotgun across her lap. "You lost?" she asked without really looking at me. "There's something back there," I panted. "People or things? I don't know." "A kid hanging, he was already—" She didn't ask another question. She just drove. She took me back to Mill Creek and dropped me at the motel like it was routine. I didn't ask questions either. Before dawn, I was back on the highway, and I didn't stop until I saw a city limits sign. I didn't eat, didn't use a bathroom, didn't breathe right until I was miles from anything that looked like woods. I filed a report about the missing truck. The cops looked puzzled. They said there was no road like the one I described. No missing kid, no abandoned building. They swept the area and found nothing. We weren't even supposed to be in Kentucky. The plan was to stick to the main highways, avoid weird detours, and make Asheville by midnight. Jason had the whole route printed out. Even though we all had phones, he's old school like that. After lunch at a grimy truck stop, I crashed in the passenger seat. One of those food coma naps where you blink and an hour disappears. When I woke up, everything outside looked wrong. Jason drove like nothing had changed. One arm propped out the window, fingers tapping the wheel like he could hear a song. But the road wasn't anything we'd been on earlier. Pavement cracked and uneven, grass pushing through. No lane markings, no signs. Just dense forest creeping tight on both sides like we didn't belong there. "Where the hell are we?" I asked. He didn't glance over. "Shortcut? GPS says it saves 20 minutes. That's when I knew something was off. Jason doesn't trust GPS. He'll use it as backup, sure. But he always follows his printed directions, and he'd triple-checked them before we left. In the back seat, Elena stirred. The hood of her sweatshirt pulled over her head and earbuds in. She sat up, squinting out the window, trying to make sense of it. "Why does it feel like we're going backwards?" she whispered. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. Every phone read, "No service." Even the radio gave us nothing. No music, no talk, not even emergency broadcasts. It felt like we'd fallen off the map. The silence stretched thin. Only the tires hummed against the rough road. It started to feel like we weren't driving toward anywhere, just through something. We rounded a sharp bend and saw a white sedan parked sideways across the road, nose crumpled into a tree. No lights, no engine noise, nobody visible inside. It looked like it had been there a while, but nothing around it was disturbed. No broken branches, no torn ground. Jason eased to a stop a few yards short. "What the hell?" he breathed. None of us moved. I opened my door and stepped out. The quiet was oppressive, a vacuum. No wind, no birds, just my heartbeat and the faint ringing in my ears. The driver's door of the sedan stood open. Inside, a purse on the floor, an old phone with a cracked screen on the seat, both airbags blown. No blood, no shattered glass. Just bare footprints leading from the open door into the trees. I stared for a second and stepped in after them. Only 10 feet when I heard it. Quick, light footfalls, circling, moving just out of sight. Not crashing or stomping, but fast. Not hiding exactly, just not showing itself. I froze and scanned the undergrowth. Nothing. When I turned back, our car seemed farther away than it should have been, and the little trail I'd just made was gone. No footprints, no bent grass, just forest. I didn't wait. I ran back to the road and told the others what I'd heard. Jason said maybe whoever crashed was concussed or high. Elena kept staring into the trees like she expected someone to step out. We couldn't call for help, so we had to keep moving. I scribbled a note, folded it, and tucked it under the sedan's wiper. "Saw your car. No one inside." Went for help. We edged around it and drove on. The road narrowed and worsened, branches knitting into a tunnel overhead. It felt like the world was folding in around us. Still no signs, no other cars, no buildings, just an endless green corridor. The first sign appeared like a dare, a wooden plank nailed to a tree, white paint slapped on in drippy strokes. "Stop while you still can," Jason snorted. "Someone's haunted corn maze." 10 minutes later, another, this time on a rusted metal post. "He sees who leaves." Elena leaned forward. "Sees who leaves what?" Neither of us answered. Then a third painted on an old oil drum. "Don't follow the music." Jason had started to slow down. The road was the same, but it felt heavier somehow. Elena pulled her hood up and shrank into her seat like trying to disappear. That's when we heard humming. Soft, low, a woman's voice off in the trees, just 3 notes looping over and over. No words, only that slow, dragging tune. Jason shut off the radio even though it was already static. We listened. I cracked my window. The sound didn't get louder and it didn't fade. It just stayed, like it had matched our speed and was pacing us. We rolled into a clearing strung with drooping lights hung low between the trees. Beneath them stood a weathered wooden sign, Church of the Last Night. A dirt path curled sharply downhill behind it into darkness. None of us spoke. Jason didn't slow. We kept going. 10 minutes later, a house appeared. One story, wooden siding, no driveway, just planted in the woods with a single porch light blinking yellow. No movement, no sound, but there was someone in the window, a pale face still and watchful, like they'd been waiting for us to pass. "It's fake," Elena whispered. "A mannequin or something." I kept my eyes on the road. "Keep going." Jason said nothing. The forest thickened until I couldn't tell if the sun was setting or if the trees had swallowed the light. The humming came back, except it wasn't humming anymore. It was a violin, slow, steady notes, not a song so much as sound. Too fluid for a recording. It followed us. We all turned our heads at once toward the left. There was nothing, no light, no movement, just trees. But the music kept pace as if walking alongside the car. Then something stepped onto the road. Jason slammed the brakes. We skidded and slid sideways across both lanes. Nothing stood there now. Whatever it was had been tall and white, its limbs bending the wrong way. It slipped out of the trees and vanished before the headlights could catch it. No one spoke. Jason turned the car around. We didn't argue. We just drove. A minute later, we passed the white sedan again. In the same spot, the same crash. The note I'd left was gone. Jason didn't react. He just floored it. We tore through turn after turn like the road was chasing us. The trees blurred. The violin never got louder or softer, it just stayed with us. Elena screamed. I twisted around and saw someone sitting beside her in the back seat. White face, no eyes, skin pulled tight, black symbols etched along the neck and chest, and a grin too wide to be real. Then it was gone, like it had never been there. Eventually we saw lights. A gas station, the ordinary glow of civilization. Jason pulled in hard and parked. We sat there for 5 full minutes without moving, without talking, just breathing. He flew home the next morning and wouldn't discuss it. He only said something had come back with us. Elena hasn't mentioned the trip since. My cousin Nate and I had this long-running promise to take a spontaneous road trip. No destination, no schedule, no reservations, just go. We kept saying someday, and then life piled on, jobs, relationships, bills. Then a random Tuesday, Nate texted, "Let's do something weird, haunted weird. Appalachian Trail. I've been reading about disappearances and ghost towns. Let's go find something messed up," I laughed. "Hunt ghosts in the woods?" "Yeah, why not?" The thing was, I wasn't in a great place. My relationship had blown up 2 months earlier, and I hadn't really come up for air. I was sliding by at work, showing up late, leaving early, sleeping till noon, eating garbage, ignoring texts. Not thriving. So when he said, "Let's go," something in me clicked. Yes, I'll drive. By Friday morning, we'd overpacked everything. Tents, sleeping bags, coolers full of junk. A propane stove I hadn't touched in years. I threw in a couple of old tarps. Nate brought a hatchet he claimed was for chopping firewood, though I think he just liked having it. We didn't map a route. The plan was to follow the Appalachian Trail south by back roads and stop wherever that weird itch told us to. The first few days were actually great. Short hikes, sleeping in the truck bed. Dusty gas stations with ancient candy racks and rattling Coke machines. At night, we tried to out-creep each other with Reddit stories. Nate told one about a guy who heard his own name being called from inside a cave, and when he went in, he found another version of himself already standing there. He told it in this deadpan way that made it worse. By day 4, we were somewhere in western North Carolina. The GPS had glitched earlier and kicked us off the main drag. We were cutting through the foothills when Nate suddenly pointed and yelled, "Stop! Back up!" I hit the brakes and reversed maybe 20 feet. He was already out of the truck. There, almost swallowed by thick brush and vines, was an old rusted sign. Devil's Elbow, 11 me. The paint was cracked and faded. Bullet holes pocked the corners of the rusted sign. And the place wasn't on any map we'd checked, not even the old paper atlas Nate kept, just in case. He grinned. "This is exactly what we're looking for." The road beyond that turn was awful. Gravel gave way to broken stone, then to what looked like a dried-up creek bed. The truck bounced so hard I thought something would snap underneath. Trees arched close overhead, branches raking the sides, and it got darker fast even though it was barely afternoon. By mile 2 we had no signal, no bars, no GPS, just us, the truck, and whatever Devil's Elbow turned out to be. We weren't even scared. If anything, it felt like we were finally getting what we came for. Around mile 11, the trail widened into a flat clearing beside a dry creek. Dirt, rocks, and silence. No houses, no mailboxes, no tire tracks, nothing. We figured it was as good a place as any to camp. We pitched the tent, coaxed a small fire from the driest wood we could find, and ate canned chili straight from the pot. As night settled in, the quiet thickened. Not the usual rural hush. No birds, no wind, not even the buzz of bugs. Just us and the occasional pop of the fire. We tried to spook each other with stories. Nate told one about a ranger who followed footprints deep into the woods until they turned into claw marks. I countered with tales of people who vanished in national parks, their voices supposedly echoing days later, across trails they were never on. By 11, I was wiped. Nate, though, was still wired. "I'm going to check out that path over there," he said, pointing past the tree line. I thought he was joking. "Dude, really? In the dark?" He shrugged. "I'll take the flashlight. Just want to see where it goes." I told him to wait until morning. He promised he'd be quick. I stayed by the fire, tossing in small sticks and watching shadows twitch along the treetops. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. I called out, no answer. I stood, grabbed my flashlight, and followed the way he'd gone. The path slipped into the woods and vanished fast. Every step echoed louder than it should have. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. After a while, a shape on the ground caught my beam, his flashlight still on, lying in the dirt. The light shone up a slope at a low mound covered in moss and leaves. Something about it was wrong. The ground around it looked lighter, loose. I knelt and pressed my fingers into the soil. It crumbled too easily, like it had just been turned. No roots, no compacted earth, just soft dirt. "Nate," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't funny." I stood and turned, and he was just there, right behind me on the trail. "Hey, man," he said, casual, like we'd bumped into each other in a grocery store. I jumped. "Where the hell did you go?" "Just checking stuff out," he said. He smiled, but something in his face was off. The smile was too stiff. His eyes were too wide. He looked like Nate, and also like someone doing an impression of Nate. We walked back without talking. At the fire, he just sat and stared into the flames. I asked again what he'd seen. He shrugged. "Not much. Just forest." I told him I'd found his flashlight on the ground. He frowned. I didn't drop it. I said it was half buried, pointing at a weird little mound. He looked at me like I was the strange one. "You must have seen someone else's." I didn't sleep. I lay in the tent, eyes open, listening. His breathing didn't sound like sleep. Too shallow, too even, like he was pretending. Just before dawn, I crawled out. A minute later, he unzipped the tent and stepped into the gray light, cheerful.
"Coffee?" he asked.
I stared at him. "We didn't bring coffee." He paused for a heartbeat. "Oh, right. That was it for me." I told him we should pack up and head into town, grab a motel, take a real shower. He agreed too quickly. The drive out felt different. The road looked the same, but everything seemed tighter. The trees pressed closer. Branches scraped the truck in places they hadn't before. It felt like we were being pushed out. As soon as we hit pavement, I pulled into the first gas station, a tiny place with a diner attached. I told Nate I needed the bathroom. Inside, I asked the waitress if I could use a phone. She handed me the receiver without question. I called my mom and told her I needed a pickup 3 hours away. I didn't give many details, just said Nate was acting weird and I didn't want to drive home alone. Back at the table, I told him the truck was overheating. He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. "Guess I'll wait with it." We sat in the diner for over an hour. I sipped water. He didn't eat or drink, just watched people come and go, eyes fixed on the door. Eventually, I said I'd walk over and find a mechanic. He watched me leave. I didn't go to a mechanic. I walked to the edge of town, sat on a bench at the bus stop, and waited until my mom pulled up. I got in, shut the door, and said, "Just go." 2 days later, I called Nate, no answer. A week after that, his sister rang. "Kev," she asked, "when was the last time you actually saw Nate?" "About a week ago," I said. Devil's elbow. Silence. Then quietly, "Kev, Nate's missing. He has been for 3 weeks. He never left New York." I went numb. That's not possible. I picked him up. We camped. He never responded to our texts. His car is still in his garage. The cops think he just disappeared. After we hung up, I opened my photos and stared at the picture I'd taken that first day. Nate standing beside the truck, smiling. It looked like him, but the eyes were wrong, and the smile was too wide. I never went back for the truck. I called the local sheriff and told them to keep it. I didn't explain why. It was 3 years ago, early summer. I'd limped through a college semester with 3 incompletes and a caffeine habit that had me twitching. My cousin Matt had just finished a rough stint as a student teacher. One of his kids threw a desk, and he needed to decompress. I needed to be far from anything like a syllabus. We sketched a loose plan. No real itinerary, a stack of paper maps, a busted GPS, and a cooler with more beer than food. We'd cut through the Appalachians, start in West Virginia, meander down the Blue Ridge, swing into North Carolina, then loop back. All back roads. If something looked interesting, we'd stop. If not, we'd keep going. No social media, no calls unless it was an emergency, and no fighting about directions unless someone was about to drive us into a river. Most of our stops came from weird old hiking forums, half-thought comments like, "Found this trail where the trees don't grow right," or "Old mill site, no signal." Spooky as hell. Not even proper posts, just fragments that made you curious without telling you anything. By the second night, we were gross. No showers, living on gas station snacks, and we'd nearly hit 2 deer in an hour. Somewhere south of Carver's Run, a tiny nowhere town east of nothing, we rolled past a janky wooden sign nailed to a crooked post. Faded, flaking paint read, "Burroughs Mill." The arrow beneath it was snapped in half, hanging limp like it couldn't be bothered to point. We slowed. No other cars, no houses, no mailboxes. No sign anyone had lived out there in a long time. Matt looked at me. "Want to check it out?" I shrugged. "Why not?" We turned. The road was more a trail, gravel and mostly dirt. Trees pressing in like they hadn't gotten the memo that cars existed. Around the first curve, a rusted truck axle lay half buried in weeds. Just the axle, no wheels. Like a decades-old warning. We didn't say anything. We just kept on. The trees opened into a clearing at last. What remained of Burroughs Mill were 2 buildings. One had collapsed into a heap of shingles and rotten beams. The other looked like a long, leaning barn or warehouse with a tin roof streaked with rust. The planks had warped over time, the whole structure slouching. No paths, no fences, no driveway, just gravel and stillness. We parked a little ways off. I stretched. Matt lit a cigarette and leaned against the hood. I told him I was going to take a look. He nodded. "Go for it." Inside, the barn was dark but dry. The air smelled like dust and old rope. Empty crates were stacked haphazardly along the wall. Coils of wire rusted in the corners. Shelves collapsed into themselves. A pulley system dangled from the ceiling, rope frayed but stubbornly hanging. Toward the back, I noticed a square cutout in the floor. A hatch. Heavy-looking but not locked. I tugged it. The hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. Below, a wooden staircase dropped straight into darkness. I backed up, went to the entrance, and shouted for Matt. He flicked his cigarette into the dirt and joined me at the hatch. "Are you serious?" he said, peering down. I already had my flashlight in hand. "Come on." I started down. He followed after a beat. The steps creaked but held. The basement was small, stone walls, dirt floor, a single thick post in the center, a few crates shoved into corners. But the back wall was wrong. It didn't match the others. Newer stones, tighter pattern, mortar that still held some color, like someone had rebuilt just that part more recently. Matt tapped it. It sounded solid. He slipped out his pocket knife and scraped at a seam. The mortar crumbled a little too easily. "This wasn't sealed that long ago," he said, frowning. I didn't touch it. I just stood there breathing air that felt wrong. Not moldy, not damp, just wrong. Like it had been sitting closed and still for too long. Then a sound above us. A soft bump, wood shifting or a crate tipping slowly. We froze. "Wind," Matt whispered. There was no wind, no draft. The hatch gaped open above us. We didn't move. We listened. Nothing else. Eventually, I snapped off the flashlight and we climbed back up, slow. The barn looked untouched, but that prickling feeling stayed, like the room remembered us. We walked back to the car. No one had driven in behind us, I checked. Only our tire tracks. Matt lit another cigarette and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You want to just camp here?" It was late. No posted signs. The barn was dry, and we hadn't passed anything better. We pitched the tent just beyond the clearing on a patch of grass that looked flat enough, cooked a couple cans of beans, cracked a few beers, and drifted into easy talk. How one of Matt's students kept calling him Mad Dad, the time I slipped at a freshman party and dumped nacho cheese onto someone's laptop. But every few minutes, one of us would glance back toward the barn. We stopped mentioning it. Like if we didn't say the word, it wouldn't matter. Around 1:30, we called it, zipped the tent and passed out. Later, I woke up with an urgent need to pee I couldn't ignore. I unzipped the tent, barefoot, and padded about 20 feet into the grass, then froze. Someone was standing in the barn doorway. Not moving, not leaning, just standing there, facing the trees, perfectly still. One foot was soaked in dew, the other braced like it could still carry me if I ran. The figure didn't shift, not an inch, until, slowly, it eased backward. Not a turn and walk. More like it slid into the dark, swallowed by it, gone. I crouched beside the tent and stared at the doorway, waiting for them to return. Nothing. I slipped back inside and nudged. Matt. There's someone in the barn. He blinked at me like I was overreacting, then saw my face and sat up without a word. We packed in total silence, tent, stove, everything. Near a tree by the barn, Matt paused and squinted. There were handprints smeared at about waist height, dark, gritty. Too fresh to be old, too dried to be recent. 5 or 6 of them. We tossed the rest of our gear into the car and peeled out. 2 miles up the track, Matt adjusted the side mirror, then turned it all the way inward. I asked what he was doing. He didn't answer at first. Then, someone just stepped onto the road behind us, barefoot. We didn't stop. Not for gas, not for food. We drove through sunrise and kept going. When we finally reached a main road, I tried to pull up Burroughs Mill on the GPS. Nothing. Later that week, with better reception, still nothing. No town, no listing, not even coordinates. The closest thing I found was a Burroughs Mill in Tennessee that burned down in 1921. Nowhere near where we'd been. Matt and I don't talk about it. If someone mentions the Appalachians, we nod and change the subject. Last October, I convinced my closest friends, Connor and Ellie, to go camping deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Not a marked campsite with bathrooms and bundles of firewood. Way out there, off-grid, barely a trail. I found the spot buried in an old backpacking forum thread, just a blurry photo and 2 lines of description. A rusted fire ring, a rotting bench, trees so thick they looked fused together. Unlisted, untouched, nearly impossible to find, the poster wrote. That sold me. I didn't want convenient. I wanted different. We left Friday at sunrise in my battered Subaru, the only car that wouldn't cry on rough roads. Connor rode up front to dodge car sickness. Ellie cocooned herself in sleeping bags in the back and handed us snacks. We set rules. No hotels, no phones after the trailhead, no check-ins, no posts. Total disconnect. We were all burned out. Work, school, the usual. We fueled up at a greasy diner outside Charleston, where Ellie swore the hash browns changed her life, then stocked water and matches at a small gas station. By 3, we were losing service. We joked this was our final chance to send if I go missing texts. By the time we reached the logging road to the site, dusk had already gathered. The GPS died completely, so I pulled out the printed directions. Turn left after mile marker 12 and look for a rusted signpost. No distances, no coordinates, just landmarks you'd miss if you blinked. We crawled up the gravel at 10 miles an hour. Branches scraped the sides. Mud pooled in dips where the road sank. We had to stop once to drag a limb out of the way. No other cars, no signs of life, just trees and whatever kept its distance within them. We rolled in around 8:15. The clearing matched the photo, only worse. The bench caved on one end. The fire ring choked with old ash and damp leaves, trees hemming us in on 3 sides. Like the woods didn't want us there. The space was barely big enough for a tent, but it was late and we were tired. We set up fast. Ellie broke out bourbon. Connor handed around the sandwiches he'd made. We tried to pretend we hadn't driven 5 hours into nothing. Once we settled, it wasn't bad. Stars overhead, a warm fire, nobody checking a screen. For the first time in a while, we weren't being tugged in 100 directions. Around midnight, we traded ghost stories. Connor told one about a haunted drive-in. Ellie invented a woman with backward feet. I recycled an old college sleep paralysis story. We laughed more than we spooked. Then Ellie stopped mid-sentence, face blank, eyes fixed past me. "Do you hear that?" At first I heard nothing. Then faint crunching, slow snaps of twigs, steady and deliberate. Not an animal darting. Footsteps. Rhythmic pacing. Connor stood fast, grabbing a flashlight. "Probably a deer," he said. I wanted to believe him, but it didn't feel like an animal. The steps stayed just outside the firelight, circling, never coming closer, never leaving. We swept our beams through the trees. Bark and branches, no movement. Still we heard the steps. Then silence. 10 seconds, 20. The hair on my arms prickled. Connor laughed nervously, dropped another log on the fire, and we tried to move on, sitting closer than before. The crackle filled the space where conversation had been. Around 1:30, we crawled into the tent and tried to sleep. At 3:03, my watch, because the phone was off, I woke with a bladder I couldn't ignore. I slipped out quietly. The clearing was silent. Not late-night quiet, no crickets, no breeze, just nothing. I took 10 steps from the tent, finished up, turned back, and stopped. Behind the collapsed bench, maybe 10 feet away, someone stood. Tall, motionless, no sound. Watching. My hands went cold. I tried to call out and nothing came. We stared at each other, me and whoever it was, until they stepped backward. Not a turn, just one slow step into the trees, and they were gone. I sprinted for the tent, dove inside, and shook them awake. There's someone out there. By the bench. Connor grabbed the hatchet. Ellie grabbed her light. We swept the clearing together. No footprints, no noise. The woods were as still as before. We didn't go back to sleep. We rebuilt the fire and sat with it until dawn, saying almost nothing. In the morning, we packed at record speed. Nobody asked if we should stay. We all knew. On the drive out, Connor scrolled through his photos, blurry shots of us laughing by the flames, then stopped. "Look at this." In the frame, the fire pit centered, the bench behind it, and to the left, half in shadow, a figure facing the camera. The exact spot where I'd seen it later. None of us had noticed when he took the picture. The car stayed quiet. A few nights later, Ellie called. She'd begun hearing footsteps outside her window after midnight. Slow, pacing. Her bedroom is on the second floor. Then Connor texted. Someone knocked on his apartment door at 3:03 a.m. He lives on the 3rd floor with no exterior stairs. He checked the peephole, no one. Opened the door, nothing. The hallway was empty. Me? So far, thank God, nothing. I was 22 when my friend Alex texted that he had 2 weeks off and wanted to disappear for a bit. I was tossing clothes into a backpack before his message even sent. We didn't plan much. We threw snacks into a dented cooler, grabbed a tent and 2 $20 sleeping bags from a clearance bin, and stuffed it all into his old Honda Civic, which made a dying whine every time he turned the key like it already regretted the trip. We left Columbus with just enough gas to limp into Kentucky, and figured we'd drift south into the Appalachians, find a few trails, maybe hike if we felt like it. No reservations, no deadlines, just space. By day 2, we were deep in the hills, and it felt like the grid had shrugged us off. Our phones gave up somewhere outside hazard. The GPS twitched every time the road curled. Highways shrank to 2-lane ribbons, then to gravel, the kind of roads that seem surprised anyone still uses them. We were following luck and wood-scarred. Signboards by then, chasing anything that looked promising. Late in the afternoon, we spotted a wooden sign nailed to a tree, handmade decades ago by the look of it. Crooked letters, faded paint. Pine Loop, Trailhead, 3MI. That was it. No arrow, no symbol. Alex tapped it. Could be something. I raised a brow. Could be how people vanish in documentaries. He laughed. It's probably a fishing trail, locals, campfires. If it's sketchy, we bounce. We turned onto a gravel path that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Trees leaned in like they were trying to read our plates, brushing the mirrors as we crept along. After a few slow, bumpy minutes, we rolled into a clearing, a flat patch of packed dirt, like someone had driven in circles 100 times. No signs, no markings, no other vehicles. And a silence that felt less like peace and more like pause, as if the forest held its breath. We got out. Alex stretched and cracked his back, totally unbothered, and started hauling gear from the trunk. I followed him down the narrow path to see if it went anywhere. Maybe 50 yards in, the trail bent around a patch of flat ground. Alex looked around, nodded like a contractor approving a blueprint, and started unpacking. I helped pitch the tent, one eye on the trees as the light drained away faster than it should have. I gathered twigs and brittle wood to coax a small fire to life. Nothing impressive, just a few flames for show. We sat beside it, not saying much. I chewed jerky. He swore at his headlamp's battery case. The quiet got under my skin. No bugs, no rustle, only the damp snap of wood that didn't really want to burn. After a while, we crawled into the tent and zipped it shut. I lay on my back watching the fabric ceiling, trying to feel tired. My stomach tightened. Probably the jerky, I told myself. Then we heard it. Something moved through the brush. Slow, deliberate, not crashing, just a few soft steps at a time. Pause. Then another. I looked at Alex. His eyes were wide open. It was too spaced out for a deer, too quiet for a bear. Then something cracked underfoot. Probably a raccoon, he whispered. I didn't answer. Neither of us believed it. The sound faded. We stayed stiff as boards for 10 more minutes before easing back down. I don't remember falling asleep. It was like I blinked and hours vanished. Then I woke to a new sound, a careful dragging scrape along the outside of the tent. Not wind, not leaves. It started at the back corner and slid across toward the zipper. A steady, unhurried scrape. I couldn't move. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it might punch through my ribs. The scraping circled the tent once, then again, the same rhythm. Silence followed. And then something pressed inward right in front of my face. In the thin, pale light leaking through the nylon, I could see its silhouette. A head, human-shaped, pushing into the fabric, not moving, not breathing, just there. My hands barely worked, but I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed straight ahead. Smooth tent wall, clean, empty. I shook Alex hard. He groaned, rolled toward me. What? There was someone outside, I whispered. He shot upright so fast he almost headbutted the ceiling. What? Right here, I saw a face. He didn't argue. He yanked the zipper and stuck his head out with the flashlight. Where's the car? He said, voice suddenly thin. At first I thought he meant where in the clearing. Then I looked. The Honda was gone. Not moved, not crashed. Gone. No tracks, no debris, just a neat rectangle of flattened dirt where it had sat. We stood there blinking, trying to process. We're leaving, Alex said. We broke camp faster than I thought possible. No words, just stuffing everything into our packs. We left the firewood and didn't even try folding the tent. We started back down the trail with the flashlight bouncing ahead, but everything looked wrong. The path felt wider, the trees taller. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following. No one was there. Then we reached a small bridge. We hadn't crossed a bridge coming in. It was old and missing planks, barely holding together, a weak stream chattering below. We stepped onto it. There's something in the water, Alex said. I followed his beam. A man lay face down in the stream. One bare foot, flannel shirt torn at the shoulder. His arms were stretched out like he'd been crawling and then just stopped. Is he alive? I whispered. Alex leaned down. Hey, you... Okay? The man snapped upright, no effort, no transition, just vertical in a blink. His head turned slowly toward us. His eyes caught the flashlight and reflected it back, pale and flat. He didn't blink. Alex dropped the light. We bolted off the trail into the trees, not caring which way, just away. Branches whipped my arms. I stumbled, caught myself, kept going. Something crashed behind us. We didn't look back. We burst into another clearing, a small cabin, one dim window glowing. No car, no generator hum, just that faint light. We pounded on the door. No answer. I tried the knob. It turned. Inside, the place was empty. Bare walls, dusty floor, nothing but old wood and silence. Except for one thing. On the far wall, carved deep into the boards, was a long list of names. Dozens. Some were slashed through. Others were clean and fresh. At the bottom, in shaky cuts, was Alex's full name. He staggered backward like he'd been hit. The door behind us creaked. We turned. In the window, maybe 15 feet away, the man from the stream stood watching. We didn't speak. We ran out the back, through the trees, into the dark, and didn't stop until our shoes hit asphalt. We walked until sunrise. A pickup finally pulled over. The driver handed us water, asked nothing, and took us to a town 20 miles away. At the sheriff's office, we told everything. "Where's the cabin?" he asked. We couldn't tell him. 2 days later, they found the Honda parked neatly at the edge of a ravine 30 miles from where we'd been. Key still in the ignition. No sign of forced entry. They called it a prank. Not long after, Alex moved to Colorado. My name is Matt. I was 23 and floating, stuck in that awkward after-college space where everything is possible but nothing feels right. No job. Lined up. No clear next step, just an itch that something had to change. So when my friend Chris pitched a road trip through the Appalachians, I didn't think. I said, "When do we leave?" He'd been dreaming it up for months. Scenic routes, old diners, roadside oddities, views so big your problems shrink. That sounded perfect. I wasn't searching for meaning. I just wanted out. We packed light but messy. Chris drove an ancient Corolla that somehow still ran, so we jammed in backpacks, a musty tent that smelled like pine needles and mildew, a cooler, with beef jerky and energy drinks, a whole loaf of bread for some reason, and way too many bottles of water. No itinerary, no hotel bookings, just the GPS set to scenic and a vague sense of south. That aimlessness felt like peeling away from gravity. Day 1, the world opened up. Pennsylvania farmland fading into endless green hills. We pulled over constantly. Once to see a 2-headed calf floating in a jar, proudly displayed by a man in overalls. Once to buy a chunk of petrified wood from a woman who swore it cured migraines. I hadn't laughed that hard in months. We ended up that night outside a town called Winslow Gap. Never heard of it before, haven't found it since. The welcome sign looked hand-painted and crooked. Right past it, a diner crammed into what used to be a gas station advertised authentic home-style biscuits. Inside was dim but cozy, duct-taped, booth seats, a corkboard of photos of strangers by the door, and a server in a floral apron with the kind, worn look of someone who's been pouring coffee since the 70s. We asked about a place to camp. Her smile was warm, but her eyes shifted just a little. "Old Briar Road, real quiet," she said. "Local kids steer clear, but you boys might like it." It felt like a tip. We probably should have heard it as a warning. Old Briar Road wasn't on Google Maps. We found it after circling twice. A thin gravel cut into the trees with no signs and no lights. We followed it to a small clearing, ringed by woods on every side. No service, no sound, just stillness. We pitched the tent, joked about how dark it was, and went to sleep early. The quiet pressed in, heavy. I woke sweating even though the air was cool. The sleeping pad felt damp. I unzipped the tent for a breath and a drink of water. One crunch, just one, like a boot on dry leaves. Then a soft scrape brushed the tent wall, too slow and smooth to be an animal, like fingers dragging canvas. "Chris," I whispered. Nothing. The silence felt physical. I slipped out barefoot, stood in the moonlight, and tried to convince myself it was squirrels or wind. Circled the tent. Nothing moved. 10 minutes, maybe more. I climbed back in, heart thudding too loud for sleep. In the morning, we didn't talk about it. We packed fast and got back on the road. Days 2 and 3, we found a rhythm. Winding byways, Coke signs faded to pink, a motel where you had to jiggle the key to lock the door. We hit every overlook, took pictures we never looked at again, sipped gas station coffee on benches while pretending not to notice how the quiet followed us. Chris teased me about turning into paranoid camp guy, but he started double-checking locks before leaving the room. People stared sometimes, not everyone, just enough. In a place called Hollow Creek, a man sat on a bench across the street, maybe 70, maybe older, and stared without blinking. I looked away, then back, still staring, empty and intent like I was a threat and not a person. I told Chris. He laughed, thin and forced. We left quickly. On day 4, Chris wanted a trailhead with a famous overlook. The GPS quit halfway there and we got lost again. The road ended at a shack split open by time, half rotten. Behind it stood a wooden frame, 4 posts and a crossbeam. A rope dangled from it, frayed, stained, old. Not tied into a noose, but it didn't have to be. Okay, nope, I said. Yeah, Chris nodded. Let's go. We didn't talk much after that. We found a family-run motel with real door chains and thick curtains. Luxury by then. I woke at 3 a.m. to knocking, steady, deliberate. Knock, pause, knock. It came from the hallway door. Chris stirred across the room. Then the knocking was at my window. I froze under the blanket like a 6-year-old. Chris turned on the lamp and stared at me.
Was that you?
I shook my head. We sat awake for an hour listening. Nothing else happened. We drifted into that uneasy half-sleep. Over burned toast the next morning, I told him everything. The rope frame, the knocking, the feeling that something was pacing us just out of sight. He didn't joke this time. We're going home, he said. No detours, no scenic routes, just highways. On day 6, we stopped for gas in Virginia. Inside, a corkboard by the bathrooms was layered with missing person flyers. Kids, hikers, young adults. Some new, some sun-faded. One photo snagged me. A boy, maybe 12, curly hair, a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I stared too long. I knew that face from somewhere. Not in person, but maybe a diner wall or a roadside board just like this one. When I got back to the car, Chris was pale and tight-lipped. He didn't say a word, just pulled out fast. That afternoon, the Corolla developed a grinding whine. Chris eased onto the shoulder of a cliffside road. No guardrails, just trees and drop-offs. I joined him at the hood, pretending I could help. Dry leaves crunched again. Slow, deliberate steps, not close but getting closer. I scanned the tree line. A shape flickered between trunks and vanished before my eyes could focus. Chris didn't wait. He slammed the hood. Get in. We drove 10 miles with the hazards on, engine complaining, silence wedged between us. That night we splurged on a chain hotel with bright lobbies and security cameras. We slept with the lights on, shoes by the door, keys in hand. When I got home, I unpacked the tent and scrubbed every inch. It didn't help.